Hello, everyone. Alexander Gregg once said that there are three things to aim at public speaking. First, to get into your subject. Then, to get your subject into yourself. And lastly, to get your subject into the heart of your audience. Touching the hearts is an art, and that can be learned. And today, we all are here to learn the skills required to ace that art, the art to deliver keynote speeches. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. Welcome to the Leadership Mastery Series. I am Dr. Ashwati Rajan, the moderator for this session. I am an edupreneur, a passionate public speaker, and an ardent learner. So, once again, I welcome you all. It is wonderful to see so many participants in our podcast today. And before moving ahead, let us know our participants. So, please type your name and your country's name in the chat box. Let us see where you are all joining from today. Let us see our members. Please turn on your videos, dear friends. It will be great to see your smiling and exciting faces. Let me see the responses. Amazing. We have members joining us from all over the world. We have Margaret joining from USA, Ray from again USA. We have members from Canada. Oh my God. Netherlands, Kenya, South Africa, Jamaica. Amazing. Canada, Francisco, Zimbabwe. Great. It is wonderful to see that our members are joining us from all across the globe. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot once again for joining us today. So, this Leadership Mastery series is a podcast series in which experts and leaders from various walks of life inspire all of us through their wisdom and experiences. For the benefit of those who are joining us for the first time, let me tell you that we are here with an entire series focused on the ultimate global keynote challenge, which will be held on February the 4th, 2024. It's a global platform where you can step onto this virtual stage and showcase your prowess in oration. So if you have not registered yet, then do it today. The link will be shared in the chat box. Hannah, can you please share the link in the chat? And if you have already registered, then please check your inboxes because you will be receiving the PDFs and the links to all the videos only if you are a registrant. So once again, if you register, the next step would be getting a buddy. So that you can do it with them. Introduce others to this challenge. That is the only way to grow. And to help us with that, we will be having these special sessions as part of Leadership Mastery series and learn about various skills needed to grow as a professional speaker. And today's session is one such session. To talk about the journey of the ultimate global keynote challenge, it has three steps. The first one is teaser submission, where you can kickstart your journey by sending an effective 3-minute video that captures the essence of your chosen global issue. And entries must be submitted by December 21st. The second step would be top 10 selection. And from all the gripping entries, our expert panel will identify top 10 entries. And the top 10 will be announced over a Zoom meeting on January the 7th. And then comes the grand finale. So if you are among the chosen 10, you can illuminate minds on February 4th by delivering an 18-minute keynote speech. So, dear friends, I would like to quote Confucius here. The will to win, the desire to succeed, the urge to reach your full potential. These are the keys that will unlock the door to personal excellence. And here is an opportunity for all of you to explore, unveil, and unleash your hidden potential and reach the personal excellence. So, are you all ready? Let me see some reactions. Are you all ready? Great. So, let me invite the founder of this initiative, Brahm Memon. Brahm Memon is a creator and a pioneer, and it is very apparent in everything he does. He's a circuit breaker, one who disrupts convention and the status quo. He has set records in the Toastmasters world. The Global Leadership Impact Summit is his brainchild. He's a constant inventor with a twist. He's an initiator, spending time on novel undertakings that stretch the boundaries of current thinking and practices. He sets benchmarks that are way ahead of the crowd, and the rest have to grow fast beyond their limitations to catch up. His coaching and training business is an example of his ingenuity, where things are so difficult that it leaves even the most seasoned leaders grasping for straws. He's a coach and a trainer in the space of personal mastery and leadership. His interest lies in unleashing the creative potential of humanity. And today he is here to introduce one legendary leader who will be guiding us and inspiring us through his experiences. So let us welcome Brahm Memon. Brahm, the virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Aswati. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for getting us all ready for the coming up interview with Lance Miller. Before I get into and introduce you to Lance Miller, and who doesn't know Lance Miller, the world champion of public speaking 2005, a good friend of mine, magnanimous gentleman, always serving us Toastmasters. But before I introduce him, why did I do this particular project? And it's a high performance leadership project. For those of you who are Toastmasters, you understand we have to do a high performance leadership, HPL project, right? You know what that means, high performance leadership project, as one of our level 5. And so somebody asked me, why are you doing this particular project? And I thought, there's a particular saying in mountaineering, a very famous saying, a quote. Somebody asked, and I forget the name of the gentleman who said this, but they asked this gentleman, why are you climbing Mount Everest? And his answer was simply, because it's there. And actually, I think Lance Miller is a mountaineer. I think he does climb mountains, so he understands. Because it's there, it's to be climbed. Because this project is available to do, and we are in Toastmasters, remember, not to become better Toastmasters. We are here to become better leaders and communicators outside in the real world. Toastmasters is an education organization, and we are all students of communication and leadership. To take it to the next level, I was thinking, what can I do to stretch the boundaries, to think way outside the box? And this was the project. And hence, I said, let's do something to do with keynotes. And, anything that I really want to learn and hone in deeply, I do speak often and everywhere globally. But when I really want to hone in my own skills, I say, why don't I take another 400-500 people on the journey along with me? About 370 people have registered to be in the Keynote Challenge. So who better would be here today to explain to us what a keynote really is, and what are the things that really make up a keynote? What's the difference between a keynote, a training session, and so on and so forth? And we'll delve into that. So Lance Miller is an award-winning speaker and trainer. He has delivered over 5,000 presentations in 60 countries on executive communication, leadership, effective management principles, and of course, the 2005 world champion of public speaking. It took him 19 years. We always joke about that, when Craig took about a year or so.
Brahma was 13. Don't exaggerate.
13, okay, all right. Did I embellish that a bit?
But it was 80 countries, so you're balancing out. So anyway.
There you go. Oh, and there it is. And on his introduction, it says he sat atop a 14,000-foot mountain and has roughest white waters in USA, sailed transatlantic from Virgin Islands to Norway, piloted his own aircraft hundreds of hours across US, scuba dived. Oh my goodness. But most of all, he's here because he's spoken a lot. He's a world champion of public speaking, and he knows about keynotes. Lance Miller, thank you so much for being magnanimous and coming here today. Welcome.
Oh, Bram, thanks for the invitation.
So, you're more qualified than anybody else, perhaps, in this room, but I would like to acknowledge, I saw Verity Price come in this room, so I'd like to acknowledge that Verity Price is in the room.
Hey, Verity.
So she's listening, and we've actually invited her to come and speak as well in a similar platform. And she's probably available in January, though she's very busy until then. So Lance, let's start off, and the first question, of course, would be: what's the difference between a keynote and a training session?
Well, a keynote, you're normally the big speaker at some event. In a training session, you're usually breaking out into smaller rooms, and you're focusing on one specific topic, one specific set of data points. You're trying to train a skill into somebody. But a keynote is a very high-level talk. It's really to set the tone for a conference or a convention. It's to get people out of their heads a little bit, to think about what could be. It is the place where we can get into a lot of aspiration. We can really talk about what are we doing here, and what is our industry doing, and what are the challenges. At the end of the day, what really matters. And there might not be something directly actionable out of that keynote that you're going to go back and apply to your business. Hopefully there is. But like a training session, you're going to go in and maybe learn how to do PowerPoints or use QuickBooks better, or figure out how to do social media, and you can go back and apply that immediately, but it's very technically oriented. Again, a keynote is a very high-level 30,000-foot view. And to me, it sort of really addresses more the emotional or spiritual nature of what we're doing in life, and what we're doing in this occupation, this field of, this vocation that we're in, whatever group you're speaking to. So I hope that sort of separates the two out.
It totally does, actually. One is honing in on a particular type of skill or skill sets, that there is a high-level view of a general overview of what really
and
convention is, the particular. Yeah.
To that point, a lot of times the keynote speaker doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the industry. They happen to have a lot to do with some aspirational idea that they promote.
So it's more of an inspirational, motivational sort of thing, rather than a negotiator persuasion type of speech.
Yeah, exactly. As an example with that, we'll just go. Simon Sinek wrote the book Start With Why. And that's a great keynote type concept because it's applicable to everybody in their business. And he's known for that book and that topic. He probably speaks to hundreds of different organizations, putting that idea across. So anyway.
How long is normally a keynote speech?
Most of mine that I get are, I'm going to say 20 minutes would be very short. About an hour is if you're doing a keynote, but I'm going to say somewhere between that sort of 30 to 60-minute realm is usually what they want. But it depends, again, on the conference you're going to. If it's a half-a-day conference, they're not going to give you an hour because they don't have that much time. But it's a 3-day conference, you're probably going to get a full hour, maybe at a dinner where you're speaking. So it depends on the organization that you're working with. But normally when you have somebody keynoting, that's a session everybody attends. So it's a big session and it's a kickoff type of activity. So they want everybody involved, and they want to make sure you have time to actually affect their group so that they get off on the right start at their conference or convention.
Now, of course, in this particular project that I'm doing, and getting people to sign up for the Global Keynote Challenge, we are doing an 18-minute keynote. The reason being, it has to be a TED-style keynote speech, and we've called it the TED-style keynote speech. Do you have any idea or any sort of shed any light on what a TED keynote is or a TED speech is? I'm throwing a curveball at you now. I know we didn't sort of say you'd probably speak to that, but
well, I think anytime, the thing I get with TED Talks is that and it's interesting because I've talked to a number of people. I've never done a TED Talk, and I've thought about it, but the different groups I've talked to had specific criteria that weren't necessarily fitting into what I wanted to do. And I'm just going to step aside on that. With what I do in my life now, I accomplished for me what I wanted to. I accomplished the confidence in myself to speak. And that was one of the reasons I was doing the World Championship. And I don't particularly personally need a lot of other letters beside my name. I have that ability. That's what I was wanting. I wanted that ability. And I have a lot of other things I do. So anyway, in the TED Talks I've done, they were saying they weren't so much being just an inspirational speech, but bringing forth some new type of a concept, which could be inspirational. But the whole idea was to bring forth some new idea, a new way of looking at something, a new set of data points that explain some aspect in life or in human struggle, the toils that we deal with on a daily basis. And to your 18-minute keynote, I think that's a great project because it's actually much harder and much more challenging to write a short, concise speech than it is to write a longer one. I think Mark Twain was famously quoted in saying, I would have written a shorter speech, but I didn't have enough time. And the hardest speeches I've ever written, and those of us that have competed in the World Championship, the International Speech Competition, and Toastmasters know you have 7 minutes. And getting your speech down to that 7 minutes is the challenge, to be able to say what you want in that amount of time. And so I think it's a good challenge you have for your audience to do an 18-minute keynote.
Mm-hmm. And I've interviewed and worked with a lot of global trainers who train for 2-3 days, and they've said that when they want to make a 7-minute or 10-minute or half an hour speech, it takes them a long time. But the 3-4 day course, they're okay with it because they run along with
I'm in the Los Angeles Rotary Club, which is an iconic club. It's the 5th club out of 32,000 clubs, or 115 years old. It's a very prestigious organization. And I had 2 minutes to introduce myself, and I wrote that speech out word for word. And this is like 4 years after I won the World Championship. I worked so hard on that 2-minute speech because I had to get all these specific points into it to go say what I wanted. And they were very specific on, they don't want you to go for 5 minutes. You have 2 minutes. That's what you've got. So I said, okay. And then after I joined the club, all these people go for 5 minutes. And I went on for 5, but anyway. So
would you say that a shorter the speech, you need more critical thinking?
Mm-hmm. You don't have time to relax into it. You don't have time to drag a story out. You don't have time to sort of look and laugh with the audience, because you have to move through that very precisely. The versus when you can relax into a 30 or 40 minute, 45, 60-minute speech. You can really relax into it and tell the stories. Know you have the time. You can cut something out if you want to. There's not a lot of room for error in a shorter speech.
Correct. So tell us now, to make a keynote effective, what do we need to do?
Well, there's a couple real critical points I look at, and I can share a couple slides here in a second. But one of the first things I look at, and this is advice given to me by a very dear Toastmaster and speaker friend of mine who's been very successful in that area. Many of you know her, Roberta Perry, who's a member of my club. But Roberta said there's 3 things that you need to, when this is my early days of speaking, there's 3 things you need to know, Lance. And I have to tell you, this has saved my skin, and it kept it really simple. So this is worth jotting down. You need to know your audience. Who's your audience? And you need to do the necessary work to figure out who the audience is. And that may mean calling some people and talking. And when I've done keynotes and I've talked to several people in an organization to really get an understanding for what they're dealing with, what are the issues that are going on in their specific either business, company, or in their industry. The second one, and this may not sound that important, but it is equally as important as the other three here, is you have to know your venue. Are you going to be speaking from a stage with a lapel mic? Are you going to be speaking behind a lectern with a head table? And part of that, knowing your venue, is getting to your venue early. I got up this morning, I was on my morning walk through the hills by my house here, and I was thinking of these talks I went to. Because I got down to the venue 2 hours early, I had to have them move the stage in completely different areas because they had me tucked back in a corner. I had no idea what they were thinking, but the hotel staff doesn't always realize what's going on, what's going to make the best presentation. So know your venue, know what you have. And that means getting down there. Knowing your venue means getting there early, looking at it, seeing it, knowing that the PowerPoint's going to work, knowing that the remote works, knowing that you have a lapel, you have a wired mic. You don't have I've had situations where I got down, the PowerPoint didn't work, and I didn't have a cordless mic. I had a wired mic, and they were introducing me, and I'm up there unwinding the mic, going on stage, and that's what you had to do. So know your venue. And the third one is know your message, because the message has to relate to the audience. Any nervousness I get today doesn't come from speaking. It comes from not being sure what my message is to my audience, and are they going to relate to the audience? That's the only thing I really get nervous about anymore. So those three things really help keep me sane. When I get a speaking request that comes in, the first thing I'm going is, let me learn about the audience. I'm looking at my messages that I think would be relevant to that. We discussed that. And then I want to know what the venue is. And then I want to get there early and make sure I'm comfortable with that venue and it's set up. And I can adjust things mentally in my own mind. If I have to shift on what I was planning to deliver, I have enough time to shift my delivery on so I'm comfortable if I'm wind up standing by an lectern with a head table and I was planning on walking around talking. So those are the first three things that I would start with. The other thing on being effective, and this was brought up in your introduction, there was a little formula I discovered in myself as I was competing for all those years, because I would come up with a message that wasn't necessarily my message. And that was the big thing I struggled with was, well, what are my messages? I was always giving messages that I was told as a young man, these are important things in life. And I would talk about those, but I didn't have any connection to them. So when you're starting a speech out, what makes your keynote effective? And Bram, we can do a deeper dive into this, but these are two triad points I want you to learn. I want that I use in my life. That's what I'm going to share with you. The next one, it starts with the message. What message do I want to get to that audience? And then above the message, we have the mechanics to deliver that message. Now, the mechanics is what we're going to get into on the opening, body, and conclusion. But you can't write the mechanics to a speech till you know the message. It's a little bit like trying to plan a vacation,
right?
And you don't know where you're going. Because the message is where you're going. And I can't tell you how many people I've had contact me to help them with their speech. And the first thing I ask them is, well, what's your message? And they go, well, I don't know. I go, well, we're going to write a speech. You sort of got to know where you want to go with this. And there's some other things, some earlier steps you can do. Let's look at what you have. Let's look at your stories. The same way you do a vacation. Let's look at what you like to do. What would have been past vacations you've enjoyed. Let's look at that. So you have your message, and above that, you have your mechanics. Now, above that, there was something that I saw in speakers, and I didn't have it in myself for a long time until I was in a contest, and I figured I was going to lose the contest, so I just say what I wanted, and I just got up there and talked to the audience, and I won the contest. That was the first time I got out of my club in 9 years. And that is what I call our life force, or our life energy. And what makes it a keynote or any speech effective is you have to believe what you're saying, and you have to want to share that message with the audience. And this is a component I don't see a lot of speech coaches get into. It's an area I focus a lot on. Do you really believe what you're saying? And I will define life force with 4 basic words. The first one is conviction. And I do a deep dive on words. As I say, I read a great book on conviction. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's called The Dictionary. And here's the thing. You can have conviction and you can get a conviction. And most people don't think of having conviction being the same thing as being a convict. But if you think about it, if you have conviction, you are a convict, right? Because you are convicted. And the word really, to get convicted in, we'll say, Western civilization, you have to be proved guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That was the point I came up with. You had to have a case brought against you that you had no reasonable doubt that you were guilty of. So I said my conviction, if I was going to stand up and talk to an audience, I had to believe my message beyond any reasonable doubts I had in the message. That meant I had conviction. Now, the reason is because we have this life energy and we want to talk to the audience. And if I question, and Brahm, part of a great speech is you see the speaker is just really there talking to the audience. And I'll dig in on that a little bit more. But if we have doubts and reservations in the back of our mind, whether somebody's going to think that's true or what we're saying is not accurate, we will hold our life energy. We will hold our conviction. We will speak,
hold back,
because we're afraid someone's going to stand up and go, liar, he's a and we're going to hold back. We won't speak without hesitation, without reservation. And that was the place I wanted to get to, was speaking completely, where it was leaving me, going to the audience. I wasn't holding back, afraid someone was going to call me out. So we have conviction. The other thing is we have passion. And I did a deep dive on passion when I saw the movie called Passion of the Christ, and they showed how Christ got crucified. I went, how could they put the word passion in that title? And I looked up the word. The root word to passion is suffer. I always thought passion was an intense liking and desire for something. But when we have passion for something, we're actually willing to suffer through whatever it takes to do that. And I have several examples of that, but I'll just say, like, I have a great passion for snow skiing. And you listen to a lot of the adventures I've been on, a lot of those, there's a lot of suffering involved in it. You go skiing, it's 0 degrees, you're up in the mountains, you're freezing, you're knee-high deep in snow, you can't see where you're going. A lot of people think that's horrible. I have passion for it, so I don't mind the suffering. So the other thing is, when we're speaking, there might be something about that subject that there's suffering with it, but we don't care because we have so much energy about that. We want to do it. But now here's the point. You can deliver a speech with conviction and with passion and knock the audience's head off. And we've seen this where, like, the Southern minister in America, and it was like fire and brimstone, you're all going to hell because of this, right? Well, that doesn't relate well, because I don't know about you, I don't like to be yelled at. So there's 2 other components to life force I want to share with you, and then I'll let Brahm talk for a second. The first one is sincerity. And you need to be sincere. And again, looking at what does that word really mean? You go down to the dictionary, down to the derivation, I'll tell you what it means. It actually means clean, which is interesting. And sincere comes from a Latin word that means no wax, which is fascinating. And they used to make pots, and they'd bake these pots in the kiln, but so they'd take them out. Sometimes the pots would break, and they'd take wax and they'd stick them back together again. So they put an additive into the pot. It wasn't a pure pot. The sincere pot was a pure pot. So here's the point. When you're talking, you don't have another ulterior motive that you're trying to talk. You're not trying to manipulate your audience. You're being very clean with your audience on what you're telling them, if that makes sense. That way, as I'm speaking with my life energy, I'm not trying to manipulate and feel somebody's going to go, wait, you're trying to trick us or something. It's like, no, I can speak to you very cleanly. The fourth word that sort of breaks that conviction and passion is humility. And the root word to humility comes from the word humble, is ground. And I went, ground? That's interesting. Well, it means you're speaking on the same ground as the audience, or better yet, you're standing on the ground and you're putting the audience on the stage and you're speaking up to your audience. And I think we've all seen speakers that speak down to us. They act like they are the best. They're an arrogance up there. And there were some specific speeches. One speaker was going, you people do this. And I was so arrogant. I sat there, I was just so turned off on that whole speech, because he wasn't treating me with someone of any respect. So humility is very important, that whoever you're speaking to, you're very grateful for your time that they're willing to listen to you, and you want to make their time worthwhile. So those are some of the component aspects. That life force is very important to me. That's where I start with most of my speeches. What do I really want to say? What do I believe? How do I want to touch the heart, change the mind? What message would do that I'm excited to deliver? And the truth is, you can have a message, and I think we've all seen this. You can have a message that you're excited to deliver, and the audience doesn't even know they want to hear it. But because you like it, the audience will like it. So don't underestimate the power of life force.
Exactly.
So I'm going to give you a chance to say something now, Brian.
Well, thank you. The first thing I want to say is that the ultimate global keynote challenge is based on a keynote that is TED style. And we've done a few sessions on what a TED style keynote is. It clearly says exactly what you've said, Lance, here, is that you have to have passion for it. You're personally connected to that global issue that you want to talk to. There's 9 different global issues that we've listed on the registration page as to which you can choose and speak to. But you just can't choose something that you didn't even know of beforehand and then go and research it and then put together and contrive an 18-minute speech and then speak to it. If it hasn't really called to you, to your soul, when there's no life force involved, you are not going to come across as being authentic and connect with the audience. So you're absolutely right. And that is the reason why I said TED style 18-minute speech, and it clearly states out what a TED style 18-minute speech is, which is exactly what you said here, Lance. So now you have this three different mechanics: the message mechanics, and the life force, the energy that you have to use. You also mentioned how to turn up beforehand and look at where the stage is, where the placement is, where the equipment may be, and so on. Now, this is in the physical environment. What about in an online environment?
Well, I think on the online environment, you're going to know your venue pretty well. There might be some things. As an example, we had some dialogue on how we were going to do this, whether I was going to speak for 45 minutes on a training session and then do Q&A or whatever. And you and I, Bram, said, no, let's do an interview style. That's a lot more enjoyable for me. And quite honestly, that's one of the things I looked at. It's more enjoyable for me. If I'm having more fun, I'm assuming the audience is going to have more fun. Okay. So on the online environment, I think you need to make sure that your room's set up properly. And, as an example, the door to my office is closed so that if there's noise out there, I don't have stuff coming in. So, but your other 2 components still come through, which are what's your message and who's your audience. And I think one of the things too that we've seen in different ways, people can get hung up into the fact they're looking at a camera or something, and they sort of lose the personal component of speaking in an online environment. I had done a lot of Zoom. I did, which I just got back up. I did the World Champion Speakers Online Summit, where I've interviewed 30 world champions for an hour and a half, and they were great interviews. And I just got that relaunched about 3 weeks ago. And now I have a bunch of world champions I had to catch up with, but I'd spent a lot of time on Zoom before COVID hit. So I was used to being live, and I'd just done a ton of speaking, so it wasn't hard. But I really look at the people when I'm talking online. I realize I'm talking to live people. I'm not talking to a camera. And I think that's a critical component for a speaker.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's easy to, when you're in an online environment, it's easy to have your energy be way too low for the size audience you're really speaking to, because you're in your office or you're in the room you're always used to being in, and you're only looking at the space between you and the camera. I'll just say that's not what I look at. I'm looking at the fact I'm delivering to a group of people, and I need to have that same energy that I would have basically on stage. I just want you to know, when I sit in my office all day long, I don't talk this way. So I'm not this energetic when just on a 18-hour day. I do have quiet moments. So, but those are the things I think that you just have to make sure your venue's good, your audience, and then again, you want to drive a specific message home. And what that does for me, no matter where I'm going in my speech, I know where my destination is, so I don't get caught up in the story and go, oh my gosh, where do I go from here? And I'm messed up in the story. No, I know that message I want to give at the end of the
mm-hmm. The other thing you mentioned is, of course, when you go to a physical venue, and the hotel staff doesn't know where it is, where they're going to set up and all that. But they're responsible for all the equipment and all the technology. You just turn up perhaps with your PowerPoint, or maybe even your laptop, maybe sometimes even not that. But in an online presentation, you are in your home or in your office or wherever you are. It's your venue, it's your technology, it's your internet. You are responsible for all that stuff completely. Your environment, your microphone, your camera, and all that. So we've done all those trainings way before. So those of people in the audience who are new to this, who are just coming, you'll have to refer to those previous videos, and that explains all that stuff about online technology. So just wanted to mention that as a sideline. Now, let's go on to the key factors to consider in creating this keynote or any keynote.
Sure. First of all, I would say the hardest thing to do in speaking is just be yourself and talk to the audience. And there's this whole imposter syndrome that I read about a lot, where
Yes.
we see it in speaking all the time, where a person stands up and they're trying to be, something greater, and they walk off the stage and they're like this, shy little introvert or something. And I always want to be the same person on stage that you meet in the hallway. That was what my goal was. And part of that whole journey was figuring out who I was, because we're told who to be most of our life. And I was trying to figure out who am I? And I think that was a shorter journey for me than it was a lot of people, but I got to discover that. A couple things on it. Just as some grounding concepts to work with. Audiences will relate more to your failures than they will to your successes. And when I've interviewed people, and I know I took a lot of what I do on stage, how I feel in the audience. I sat in audiences, and I still do, but when I wasn't up there speaking all the time, and I had a speaker stand up, and they talked about how they started this business and this happened, and then they climbed Kilimanjaro, and then they sailed around the world, and they did all this. I sat there just being frustrated, because those are the things in life I wanted to do, but none of the things were working out. And I will share with you, I heard it was actually in my Rotary Club. We had a speaker come in who was one of the past CEOs of Coca-Cola bottling company, not the Coca-Cola, but the bottling plants. And he had this incredible introduction, and he stood up and he said, yes, in 1978, I was brought into Coca-Cola bottling, and our stock was selling at $24.35. And for the next 8 years, we did everything we could to make our plants more efficient. We did everything we could to make our employees more productive. We streamlined every activity we could to have the most profitable, efficient operations on the planet. And 8 years later, our stock was at $23.50. So the stock went down 97 cents, right? He said, so they fired me and my team. They brought in a team of new MBAs, and it only took them 2 years to take that stock all the way to $2.14. I love that guy immediately, because I have been in so many situations where I feel I'm working my tail off to sink slower, right? But I'm sinking as slow as I can right now. And I immediately related to that failure. And then I've been removed from jobs and pulled off, and then he put somebody else on, and the thing tanks. And I go, you guys didn't realize I was doing everything I could. I can relate to that failure so much more than I can relate to, some great success that they've had. The other thing is to share versus tell. There's a whole different component when we share a message with people versus we try to tell you people what you need to hear. There's an arrogance that comes off when I start to tell people things. But if I'm sharing what worked for me, I'm giving the audience their own freedom of choice, whether they accept it or not. And if they accept it of their own free will, they're going to hold on to it. If they accept it because I tell them they need to do it, there's going to be a resistance to it. So those are a couple of the attitudinal points that I try to put into my speaking. And with that, I want to get into sort of story sequence here for a second, Bram. There's a real simple story sequence I use. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over. There's a couple points, and I'm going to pop over to my PowerPoint. Let's see. Somebody else is sharing the screen. So I'll just walk through the story sequence then. There's 3 acts in every story, and people get really complicated on telling stories. But there's three basic acts, and you can watch any movie. You can go back and read Romeo and Juliet. You can see Gone with the Wind. You can see Iron Man 18. I don't care what you see. There's basically three acts the story is going to follow. And the first act is what we call the setup. And that is, when was it? Where was it? Who was there? Sort of what's going on a little bit, but what's the conflict? But the big thing is the when, where, and the who, and then what's the conflict? And I see a lot of people start their stories off about, let's just give an example, when I was a child. Well, that could be you were 4 years old, that could be you're 18 years old, and then you say, when I was a child, and then they're telling you what was going on. And then they said, I remember I borrowed my father's car, and you're thinking they're 8 years old, and you're going, whoa, they don't give you any time frame. I was coaching another gentleman, and he was telling me this story. He was from India, and he was telling me the story, and it didn't make any sense. And I couldn't I was reading a speech, and I said, where did this take place? He goes, oh, I went to school in Kenya. So he was an Indian calling me from India, and the story took place in Kenya, and that was completely dropped out. But to him, he knew that. He didn't think to tell the audience that. So the first is, when was it? Where was it? Who's there? What's the conflict? First act. That doesn't have to be 10 minutes. In my world champion speech was about 20 seconds. The second act,
right,
and this is where the failures come in, and this is what sort of makes your speech, I say it puts dramatic tension in it. It makes it sticky. Are failed attempts to resolve the conflict. And if you look at a movie like Iron Man, the whole movie is Iron Man failing to beat up the villain, right? That's the whole movie, is failed attempts to resolve the conflict. I usually try to put three in. I tried this and that didn't work. I tried this. That gives a little bit of a triad, is a really good product, a really good rhetorical device to put a pattern in. And so you share with how you tried to resolve this conflict and it didn't resolve. The third act is the resolution of the conflict by the hero. And I would say, and I think most speakers agree with this, is you don't want to be the hero of your own speech or your own story, because it sort of puts you in an, let me tell you how smart I am viewpoint. And here's the thing, if I receive the message from the hero, the audience receives the message from the hero. We all receive it from the hero. And the hero doesn't have to be a person. It could be a story you read. I was coaching a person in Canada, and he had driven across the bridge over to Prince Edward Island, and the ocean was really rough, and he realized the bridge was anchored in bedrock, and that resolved the conflict with the family he was having, that the bedrock of the family was the love they had, and he used the bridge as the hero. It has to be an external component that gives you the resolution to what's going on. And what you can do in your keynote, you can put several little vignette stories in your keynote. And I'll walk through here. Well, I was going to share some stuff, but I can't get on the share screen, which is okay. But I was going to walk through. We can just talk about this.
Lance, is the share screen is available on my side here? Can't you access it?
Yeah, but when I do it, it says starting share screen will stop other participants' computer sound share. You want to continue. So.
Oh, I see. Oh my goodness. Oops. That was inadvertent.
Okay.
You should have told me, but I didn't see it.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
There we go. Now, hey, we can do it now. Let's see if I can.
Apologies.
It's okay. Let's see if I can get this up, or if I have to go back out and do it. Okay, give me 1 second here. I got to pop that one to full screen. There we go. All right, good. I'm glad we got that resolved. So let's look at this now. Boom. I'll walk through this so you can see it. So we have this, I call this my inspirational speech structure, but it's really a story structure. So there's different types of speeches. Speaking to inform, which is, are you going to tell them what you're going to tell them? You're going to tell them, and we're going to tell them what you told them. Speaking to persuade, which is sort of Monroe's motivated sequence. Speaking to entertain, which is all over the place, after dinner speeches to just humorous speeches. And there's speaking to inspire. The word inspire means to breathe life into somebody. It's a lot better to speak to inspire than to speak to expire. And there's been a lot of speakers I've heard that expired me, okay? So the story structure is this. There's three acts. The first act is the setup, where, when, who, what, and the conflict, okay? The second act are failed attempts to resolve the conflict. And the third act is the resolution of the conflict by the hero. Now, when I put this into a speech structure, I use a program, a little thing I call SPA, which is story. You make it, the story makes the point you want to make, and then you share the application of that point and how it worked. And this is the sharing versus telling component. So you have your 3 acts here. Now, here's the thing, your resolution right here, the resolution of this conflict is the point of your story. Okay, that's why you tell the story. That's what resolved it. And then you take that point and you share how you applied that point in your life. That was a lesson you learned. And by sharing how you applied it in your life, the audience can see, oh, I could apply that to this point in my life. Now, the reason I share how I applied it in my life, and you've all heard speakers do this. They'll say, maybe you have a book you haven't written. Maybe you have a vacation you want to take. And they try to guess what the problem the person in the audience has, and it's not any of those things. If you allow the person in the audience to select their own problem that solution would be for, that resolution to be in their life, they'll immediately attach it to that they could do with that. Application is a very big point of how do you apply this? How did this change your life? Okay, now I have some other stuff. I got a bunch of things. I'm scrolling down through this. Here we go. Let's look at a keynote here. So we're going to, I just sketched this out, Brahm, as an opening keynote it's an hour keynote. Okay, we're going to play with it. You open, you spend 5 minutes talking about the audience. It's great to be here. You've learned this about, you've learned that. So you're relating to the audience right up front. You're trying to get some connection with the audience. I talked to the executive director of your trade association and I hear you, this is what's going on. And you've got these. So you're going, wow, this person, they're relating to me. Then you come out and you have an opening story and you have your 3 acts. And a 10-minute story is not that long of a story. It goes pretty fast to tell a story about something that occurred in your life that's going to lead to this ultimate message you're going to give. Now, that story is going to make a certain point, and you're going to have some application. And then you come up with either a quote or some research, a study, and you're going to spend 5 minutes that once I learned this, I discovered there was a study done at Harvard. And this is what they said. Now that backs up your realization now, or it breaks up your story point. Now, one of the key things I have on using quotes, and a lot of people, I'm going to pop out just so the audience can see me a little better. When you use a quote, a lot of people go, yes, because Harvard said this. It's a little bit like, you won't believe me, but Harvard said this, or Abraham Lincoln said this, or Martin Luther King or Gandhi said this. It's a little bit like they're bringing Abraham Lincoln or Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. to the speech. He said it, so you know what I'm saying is true. The way I feel we should do a quote is, as an example, one of the things Martin Luther King said was that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And then I go, and when I heard that, I realized that there were things going on across the planet that if I didn't stop them there, they could affect me where I live. And that's a true story to my life. I did a lot of human rights work, especially on religious freedom issues and things for about 7 years. And that quote was a big thing that inspired me. So what you do is you take the quote, or when I read this study from Harvard, when I read it, this is what I realized. And you remain the source of your communication versus trying to say, Harvard said this, and you'll believe them. When I read it, this is what I realized. So have the quote, have the research come to you, and then you tell the audience how that reinforced what you've experienced through your story. Okay, so let's go ahead.
Just a minute, Lance. That's such an important point, really, is, we're using some external, figure as an authority. So here's an authority, I believed in him, you'd better believe in it. It's like you're promoting a religion or something, right? The external authority. And it's like,
where you're speaking, you're the authority. You're the one that's there. You're the expert.
Yeah, the expert, yes.
And so there's a lot of stuff that inspires us, but maintain, you're the speaker, maintain your relationship as the source of information on the stage. Don't start turning it over to, there was this CNN study and then Reuters did this or something like that. No, when I saw that, this is what I realized. And then you get the audience to start taking the information and going, oh, because one of the big problems we have in the world today is that people are looking to all these external sources we have tremendously crazy control in our media stuff, and there's all this misinformation coming out all over the place. No, when I hear that, what do I hear? How do I react to it? Okay.
Correct. How does it fit with my current reality, and how is it going to change? How did it change my reality to a bigger perspective and a bigger view of the world, right? Rather
And
than this
also,
narrow view. So
how can I apply that? That reinforced
yes.
application, because the whole thing we're wanting to do is change the way people act, the application of being successful. What do I need to do to be successful? I'm going to reinforce your actions in your life versus I'm just going to make you feel good with the keynote.
You know, I want the audience to really take this, and this is so important, you know, because especially in Toastmasters, you know, we are waiting for some authority, you know, and here you are in Toastmasters, you are thrown in and say, you're on your own, be self-directed, you do your speeches when you want, nobody's going to downgrade you. The only person that's going to downgrade is you. So, you know, take charge, understand what's really going on, and really take charge of your life and your speeches and what you're doing in Toastmasters and this particular thing. Not somebody said this, so it is right. But how did it change your perspective? How did it change your life? It's so important for the audience to understand this, especially at Toastmasters level, because, you know, we see the numbers are dwindling, and it's because we don't know how to take charge. You know, we are still looking for an outside authority, which is, Lance, this is your favorite thing, right? The authority outside of us, right? So
well, I talk a lot about that
yes,
we grow up, we have our parents telling us what to do. We grow up, we go to school, we learn, we succeed if we do what the teacher says. We go to work, we succeed if we do what the boss says, and we wind up turning over our own creativity. We turn over our own initiative in life, waiting for somebody to say it's okay for us to succeed. And that happened to me to a lesser degree because I was also climbing mountains and jumping off cliffs and diving under the ice and frozen lakes. And a lot of that required me to do it. But I had to unscramble that egg in my life where I was controlling and doing my goals and purposes. And I was looking at things from my perspective, and I still have stuff creep in that I go, God, that's not my viewpoint. So to me, this is the essence of being alive. So, you know, but that's a different, Bram, we'll do a different talk on that one. I'm going to walk.
Let's carry on. But I thought it was just important for
I appreciate
your perspective.
Your response. Okay, so on this, so we give it. So we did an opening, we did a short story. We have some research that backs up the point we did. We do a second story. You know, a little bit later in my life, this happened, and you go through, and maybe that story's 10 minutes, and these are arbitrary numbers. Maybe your story's 5 minutes. I don't care. And then you have lessons you learned from all this that you're applying. The lessons I learned on how to deal with people, and then you have the application. I was in this job, and this happened. I was in JFK Airport, and this happened. And I applied this principle, and this is what happened. You know, I was on a beach in Tahiti, and this happened. So you show that, oh my gosh, look what went on. And then you have a major example of a story. Now you take it up to a really big thing, but it really hit me at this point. I was hired to do X, or I was put in this situation, and you wind up with this story. And what got me out was this concept. And then you have just a concluding wrap up for 5 minutes. And I just sat down and said, if I was going to sort of put an idea of how you can piece together a keynote. Now, the point is, you can mix and match these however you want. You can slide them around. I want to tell 3 stories in a row, and then I want to do this. Mix and match them, but it gives you some of the component parts you can play with a keynote. You can find 6 different pieces of research, or 3 quotes, 2 pieces of research, and a crazy study. There's all sorts of stuff you can play with this, but I just wanted to show you how you can start to piece together what you want, you know, what you want to do in a keynote, and then play with it to see what's actually going to make the most sense from that standpoint.
So these are just, of course, suggested times of, and people can play around with those timings to make sure that they come within the 45 minutes, or of course in the 18-minute keynote. Of course,
that was an hour keynote. You wouldn't be able to do that in an 18-minute keynote.
Yes, of course.
An 18-minute keynote, you have time for probably 1 good story, some application, a couple quotes, some research, and then maybe some other application off that, and then wrap it up on how this really affects us. And you believe if this occurred in life, we'd have a better life in some way. Yeah.
And we did that about the 18-minute keynote TED style of what suggested timelines a couple of weeks back as well. So thank you. Now, you know, in any speech, there's an opening, a content, a body, the body is layered, and a conclusion. You know, how does the keynote open? What are the typical ways of opening a keynote? As opposed to a 7-minute Toastmaster speech, let's put it this way.
Well, the nice thing
Is
with
there a
opening
difference?
a keynote, Ron, nice thing you can relax into the opening of the keynote. But I've had, I was writing down some of the keynotes that I really enjoyed. And first of all, normally in a keynote, you have a pretty good introduction by the audience or by the group, whoever the moderator is, right? And so you're usually introduced. And one of the things I would tell you is, when does your speech start? And we see this in Toastmasters all the time, because the timing starts when the first person makes the first verbal origination, or they start their action. So you see all these people that they start their competition, and they're like trying to get in their mind, and they introduce them and they stand there. I go, the audience is now looking at you. And so one of the things to keep in mind, your keynote starts for the audience when they see you standing over at the side of the stage. So if you're over there and you're looking through your notes and you're wiping your brow off and you're doing some jumping jacks and stuff like that, the audience is watching you. So just realize you're making an impression as far as your opening goes. And one of the best keynotes I heard, and I can't remember what year it was, but it was the Toastmasters convention was in Orlando, I think. And it was the first year, I think, they had the semifinals, but a gentleman named Joel Manby, who was president of Herschel Entertainment, spoke, and he had a book called Leading with Love. And it was an incredibly powerful keynote. And he was very sincere. And I had been tasked, the reason I remember so well, from Toastmasters International to coach him. So I listened to the whole thing, and I had a coaching session with him a couple of weeks later and went over the keynote with him. But one of the things, just some do's and don'ts, one of the things that Joel did, he walked out on stage from behind with a bottle of water under his arm. And I think he had some papers in his hand, and he walked over to the lectern and he put the bottle of water and he put the papers on the lectern, and then he walked to the center of the stage. And the first thing I thought is, what do you know with water? So here's one of the key things I do. If I need notes or I need something, I go up and put it in the lectern before I speak. And that might be an hour before I speak, but I put it underneath because I don't want to walk on stage carrying some notes. To me, that is a distraction. And quite honestly, it's a degradation to me to have to walk on with notes, because the audience's attention is going to be on the paper. The other thing is, if you have a bottle of water or something, have that stuck someplace that you can go over and get it. And, maybe on a table if you need to have some water, but don't, anything like that, that you have. But I think you would start your keynote off by thanking the host, recognizing the audience, from that standpoint. I think just good manners is involved with this. Yeah. I think having some humor up front, maybe discussing your position in life compared to theirs. And what I mean by that is, let's just say that you were, speaking at a plumbing convention and you're not a plumber. You can say, it's fascinating to be here. I've never seen this many plumbers. Usually just one comes to my house when I call them or something, it's like, just whatever, you just go, but it's now there's one of me and there's all of you. So, and, and I'd probably throw some humor in there somewhere that, hopefully this speech flows smoothly and, you don't feel stopped up at the end of the talk here, and something. But anyway, look at what you can do. But I think coming out, recognizing, having that sincerity, having that humility up front, recognizing the host, recognizing the people, explaining. That's what I'm saying. Your opening is, I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and talk to you today. I've talked to 3 people in your industry. This is what I found out. I spoke, especially if you have some influencers in the industry. I spent an hour on the phone with Brahm, and Brahm was telling me this. I took so-and-so to lunch, and we talked about the things in your industry. They realize that you put some work into this at this point. There's a connection. That's why on that little sheet I just put up, the first thing I said, you got 5 minutes. Yes. You're sort of talking about you and your industry. Or I was asked to come in here, and quite honestly, I'm not sure why you invited me. This is what I do, and this is what you do, but this is what I want to share with you. There's another, I want to give you another example that stood out. Jim Cathcart is a well-known speaker, and he's out here in California, and I've been with Jim many times. Jim was invited to speak at a medical convention where everybody had the equivalency. They all had doctorates, because they were very highly trained medical experts, and he was there as a leadership expert. And he said he had such a highly educated group of people, it was quite intimidating. And Jim grew up in Arkansas and used to repossess loggers' trucks from him. He was a little skinny guy, and he goes, he had to learn how to talk to take these trucks away from these big burly lumberjacks and stuff. And fascinating background, but he doesn't have a PhD in anything. I'm not even sure if he has a college education, but he started his keynote off with how impressed he was with the expertise that he got to speak to. And he goes, I'm curious, how much training have you done in leadership? And how many have you done in leadership training? A couple hands went up, and he goes, okay, I just want to set the stage. When it comes to fixing a body or correcting disease, you're the expert. When it comes to leadership, I'm the expert. And he just sort of set the stage with him right there, because there's an old joke. You know what the difference is between God and a doctor? And the answer is God doesn't think he's a doctor. There's a whole thing when you there's a whole component when you talk to high level people in their trade where they've got a lot of education, and especially, I had my appendix out 10 years ago, and it's great. It's a great speech because my appendix wasn't the problem. They yanked an organ out of my body, and it wasn't the problem. And so I made a speech out of it. But the surgeon, before he was putting me under, and he says, I just want to let you know, I may not be able to heal you. And I looked at it and going, that's a sort of godlike statement. I may not be able to heal you. And I went, well, just do the best you can on a thing. So there is this arrogance people can get. But what Jim did is he set the thing up so that he sort of addressed that and said, when it comes to leadership, I'm the expert. And let me tell you why I am. And then he backed up the experience he had, what he'd done, the people he'd worked with, and things like that. So there's 100 ways to start your speech. There's 100 ways to start a keynote. Yeah. And if you have a question, I'd recommend get together with a couple people and look at how to start it. Talk to your group. Talk to the key people in the group. I'm thinking about starting the keynote this way. Would that insult anybody? Because the last thing you want to do is put something in your talk that turns off the audience right up front, because you probably won't get them back. And just as an example with that, I had an opening when I was working on my world champion speech. I talked about the ultimate question, this plagued man since the dawn of time, since he first climbed down out of the trees, walked upright on 2 feet, and wore a digital watch. Now, that was something I read out of a Douglas Adams book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I thought it was hysterical. I had 2 people from 2 different clubs tell me they didn't like the climb down out of the trees comment. And the first one I sort of dismissed. I thanked her for it. I dismissed the second one. I went, it's out of there. And I looked at it and I said, my gosh, I'm going to alienate half my audience with an evolutionary statement versus creationism that has nothing to do with my speech. I will never get them back because I said something that struck at their core belief. Right. And I will never get them back. They will not like me because of that, no matter how good the speech is. And I had to change. I was going to change it anyway because the opening was not working. But anyway, it was such a great lesson to learn. And don't put something in there, especially right up front, that might alienate your audience. If you do put a hot potato like that in, say, I want to address something, and I'm not addressing creationism or evolution, but I'm addressing this point. So I understand we all have deeply held beliefs in that area. Address that elephant in the room so you don't alienate your audience. Or it could be, I don't care, Antifa versus the Ku Klux Klan. I don't care what it is. I'm just saying, say we all have deeply held beliefs in this area, and let's address that so that you hold your audience with it.
Love it. Absolutely. Yes. So now I think we'll open it up to the audience questions, because there's a time for the audience questions. I'm sure there's quite a number of questions there. So put them in the comments, in the chat. Aswati will call upon you for your questions. And Aswati, are there any questions?
Yes, we have a question, actually,
Wonderful.
a few questions from Elios.
Good.
So I will
Mhm.
spotlight him. He can ask the
Sure.
question.
Hello.
Hi, Elios.
Hi, Ditya Brahma and World Champion Lance. So I have some question, but I would like to ask this first. Where is it? Okay. What resources or courses or books would you recommend for someone looking to improve their skills in keynote speaking? That's my first question.
Well, there's a lot of stuff I do to improve myself, and there's a lot of. I have a specific, we'll say, spiritual, religious philosophy I follow and I study extensively, and I always leave that up to you personally to do that. But I gain a tremendous amount from my insight into who I am from that standpoint. So I would recommend you find things that are interest to you. Specifically on keynotes, a lot of what I did, Elios, was I got on stage and spoke, and I was willing to mess it up, and I was willing to screw up, and I was from the beginning of my speaking, I was thrown into environments that needed a speaker. And the first thing I started back in the 1990s, I debated federal tax policy for 3 years. I was on about over 150 radio shows, and I spoke all over California. I did not know how to speak that well, but it was something I was passionate about, had a lot of conviction on. And I made a lot of mistakes with that. For 7 years, I spoke on international human rights. It wasn't that I said, I want to go speak on human rights. They said, we have a crisis. We need someone who can lead teams and can go speak. And I said, they came to me and I said, yeah, the line was pretty short. There weren't a lot of people on that, but I went out there, made my mistakes, but I was passionate. That life energy is that thing I talk about, was what I really drove on. And then, I won a world championship in Toastmasters. And, I remember the week after, I was getting all these emails, and District 67 from Taiwan called and said, we'd like you to come to Taiwan. And I said, oh, I'd love to go to Asia. I've never been to Asia. This would be fun. What do you want me to do? Now, word to the wise is ask them what do you want to do before agreeing to come. They said, well, we'd like a 45-minute keynote and two 2-hour seminars. And at that point, I had been giving 5 to 7-minute speeches in Toastmasters. And it was a whole other game. I had to come up with 45-minute keynote and 2-hour seminars. And my big fear was I was going to repeat myself several times because I didn't know I had that much information to give. In the process of that, I discovered it. But the biggest thing I would look at is just get out there and do it and watch. I watch other speakers all the time. That's the main thing. I don't necessarily go read a book on it. I watch other speakers to what's working for them. And what did I like? What did I relate to in that speech? And then that's a great technique. So that's what I use. You're still muted, okay? So I'm sure we got some other people that have some questions. So let's move to this, okay?
Yes. Thank you, World Champion Lance, for
Yes,
answering my question.
Thank you, Elios. While we're going for the next question, Aswati as well, could you put Lance Miller's website link in the chat for people to visit his website and see what he actually does in his coaching and so on as well?
Yes.
Also, just on that, I had that in you saw as I flipped through those slides, I have all these little tips cards. This is a championship club tips card. This is a speaking tips card. They're 4x6 cards. This is a speech evaluation tips card. They're all on my website for free downloads. And the World Champion Speakers Online Summit is great because I do about an hour-and-a-half interview with every world champion, and you sort of get to know their backstory and stuff. That's on the website. You can get in there as well. So, and I have a weekly Zoom video I shoot, or a video tip I send out every week on speaking. So,
as Toastmasters, most people do have their 5 to 7 minute speech. Some of them are more advanced Toastmasters. They've really downpacked the 5 to 7 minute speech, but they don't know how to unpack it into a keynote. What are your suggestions?
Well, first of all, what I do, I have hundreds of 5 to 7 minute speeches. Each one's a great little vignette. You know how you can put your pieces I was showing you. So keep those speeches And so I have all these prepared speeches, and I will mix and match them. The other thing is, a lot of them, there was so much detail I had to take out of the speech because I only had 7 minutes. So it allows me to relax back into that speech and give some of the detail that really could impact it a little bit more. The other thing I would say is that I have stories that story is good for 4 or 5 different messages. So just because you have a story and a message, that same story can mean that can be a different message. So when I give speeches now, it's like I have my pieces. I'll just start sort of picking them apart. And then I just gave a talk for Smedley Advanced Club, which the Smedley #1 is the 99-year-old club in Toastmasters, and they were celebrating 99 years in Toastmasters. And I had a 10-minute speech that I called Speak, Lead, Succeed. And it was the first time I actually got to speak in front of a live audience in a while and a few things. So they had about 20 people there, and I think 50 or 60 online. But it was fun to have some of my vignettes. And then I just looked at my current life, and I looked at what issues were going on in my life. I looked at the fact I'm driving down to Orange County to give this talk, and the fact that I get to do that. And I sort of reflected on myself to find some other messages that were relevant, that weren't 15-year-old messages, and then sort of put my speech together from that. I also have a tendency, I don't want to get off your point here, but I have a tendency to watch my life. And I used to do this when I was competing, because I was always looking for messages, and I would go, write a speech about, I get stuck in traffic, and I go, write a speech about this. And I would write a speech in my mind about being stuck in traffic. Or I'd walk by a set of stairs, and I go, write a speech about that. And I would have to use the stairs and write a speech about stairs and all these things. I would have a glass of water on. I'd be waiting in a restaurant by myself, and I'd go, there'd be a glass of water, and I'd go, write a speech about that. And I would come up with a speech about the glass of water. The funny one, Brahm, I think you know this, in 2017, December 21st, I was on my motorcycle, and a truck pulled out in front of me, and I hit a truck at 45 miles an hour on my motorcycle. And I woke up in the hospital 45 minutes later, and the doctor's over me. I'm in the emergency room, and I got that neck thing on and stuff. And they go, Lance, you hit a truck with your motorcycle, you broke your ankle. And I looked down, and literally my foot's here, and my leg's here, my foot's over here. And I go, oh, because we think you got a couple cracked ribs in your right shoulder. We're checking for internal industries. Brahm, I was awake about 90 seconds. And I'm looking at this, and I go, oh man, there's gonna be a great speech in this. And there was a great speech in it. There was a great speech in it. You can take anything in life around. Mary's got her hand up, so let's move on.
Mary Touch.
There you go.
Super. Hello, Bram. Hello, Lance.
Hey, Mary.
That was a great presentation. I love it. Thank Bram for organizing this. Amazing. So,
Welcome.
yes, I have a question here. Since the structure of the speech, the story, the point, and the application, and you have mentioned that the application, we should talk about how we apply it in our own life. But they are not all the, what I mean is that, for example, I have my mother's story who went through the war in Cambodia, and she lost everyone in her family. And when I talk about that, in the application, I will talk about how she survived, how she thrived from that tragedy, right? So that is not my own experience. Is that impactful?
Here's what I would recommend. You do have a challenge there because it's not your story. So your challenge, Mary, is to make it your story. And what I would say is, as I watched my mother do this. I observed my mother do that, because this is what happened to my mother. And what I learned from my mother was this. And I'm sure your mother has had a huge impact on your life.
Yes, absolutely.
But you need to make your mother's story have the same impact on on the audience's life as it had on your life. And so if you share the impact that your mother's story had on your life and what you learned from your mother, the audience can get that same story that affected them, and they will have principles that they can apply in their life, or actions, applications of the point in their life that will make their life better. We're always looking, well, this is my point. I was always looking at, we all deal with different confusions in life. And if I could come up with something that handled a confusion for somebody, like somebody's yelling at you, how do you handle that without, either crawling into a hole or fighting back? How do you handle that in a good way? Whatever the confusion is. If I could come up with a way that worked for me, I could share it with other people. And so the challenge you have is that it's not your story, yet you're the speaker. And there's a disconnect that happens at that point. You need to make your mother's story your story. And then that's going to bring the power to you as a speaker because of the influence she had, what you learned, that you didn't have to go through that. But because she went through it, you got to live at you got the benefit of her life experience without having to have her life experience. And that's what you're giving the audience.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lens. Thank you.
Right point. Swati, anybody else has any
Yes, we
questions?
have a question from Mrinal. So I will spotlight him. Yes, here you go, Mina. You can ask the question.
Thank you so much. It's an amazing session, I must say. So without further ado, I just want to say, how should I use live quotes and connect with the audience to deliver keynote speech?
Okay,
Emotional connection with the audience and live quotes. How can I do that?
Well, here's the thing. What is it? This is what I have to look at. Do you believe your message? What is it you're excited about? And a lot of times you have to take some inventory of your life. It's not like we come out of the womb and you go, this is my message for the world. We're trying to learn how to walk. Okay. And so you have to figure out, but here's what I know. Like, say you're watching a sports team. You have I don't know if you have football or cricket or wherever you're coming from. You have this team and they're behind, and all of a sudden they score and they go ahead. Your life force comes out of you. It's like, yes. It's not like you went, okay, I am going to give some gestures here. No, that life energy comes out of you because you want your team to win, and you have conviction and passion for your team, and you're excited, and you're high-fiving your buddies and stuff like that. What you have to do is there has to be something that you go, I really want this. I want to communicate this. This is something I believe in. And look, for 8 years, I was giving speeches in the international speech competition that I thought the audience wanted to hear, and I wasn't connected with them. And I didn't get out of my club for 8 years. But I also had those that know my story, we built my club to the #4 club in the world. I had 95 members in it. So it was bigger than a district contest too. But anyway, when I finally won the contest at the club level, I was driving to the club and I had the speech in the passenger side of the car, and I went, I don't want to give this speech. I might as well talk about what I want to talk about. I'm going to lose the contest. So I rewrote the speech and I said in the back, I said, I'm going to lose the contest. I'll just talk about what I want to talk about. I got up and just talked about what I wanted to talk about and talked to the audience, and I won the contest. And so part of my thing is talk like you're going to lose. It's like, yeah, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. But there's a process you go through of looking at life and discovering where your energy is. What excites you? What do you believe in? And the thing is, we've been imprinted, as I was saying, we've been imprinted very heavily by parents, by school, by society, by jobs, by media on what we're supposed to believe. And it's sort of shedding that imprintation off of us and getting down to the core beliefs and what I really believe in, and then communicating that. So it's a bit of a journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this was a very critical component to becoming an effective speaker.
It's the best speakers are, this I'll come back. The hardest thing is to be yourself and talk to the audience. And the best speakers that are out there, you just feel like they're just talking to you. They're not giving a grandiose speech, ladies and gentlemen, no, they're just talking to you. And that's all I'm trying to do to you today. So I'm just trying to talk to you. That's all, to share some of my experience and my lessons with you.
Authenticity, right? Authenticity is the key.
Authenticity. The root word of that is author, which goes a lot back up to authority. The authority is the author, and you want to be the author. You want to be the author of your own life.
Exactly. Thank you, Mrinal. And Mrinal is actually an aspiring keynote speaker, right? And he's a member of Leadership Speak, so he's really honing in on his skills there. Thank you, Mrinal. Aswati, I see. Oh, I see raised hands. Aswati, go ahead.
Hi there, Lance. Great points. I'm going to take spa home with me for as long as I can. And with this last part, now I've got this big old question, because if we go on the idea of that, to speak like if we want to lose, I know I lost a contest because I feel comfortable, and in my authentic self, I know I have a sailor's vocabulary. Okay. And in our, knowing the audience is extremely conservative. They do not like anything that pushes the buttons, politics, religion, the F-bomb, not happening. So how do you keep authenticity while at the same time honoring the audience?
Well, great question. And I'm going to answer it, just so you know. But one of the things is you need to take that energy, that conviction, that passion you have for the subject, and you needed it to channel it in a way. And I'm going to answer it by what the definition of communication is. The definition is what gets duplicated and understood at the other end. It's not what you originate. The only component of communication is what the other person understood. That's when the cycle completed. And if you look at two computers that communicate, if one is sending impulses and messages, but the other one isn't receiving, they're not communicating. And really what's happening with you is you're sending impulses and messages to this audience, and it's not communicating, it's having the negative effect. So you need to be able to make sure that your message communicates. And by and large, I have another gentleman, a coach, who's a goalie coach in the National Hockey, NHL, National Hockey League. He was a Toronto Blue Jays. He's on the ice with hockey players, and every other freaking word is the F word with him. And he swears like he's like a drunken sailor. And I said, you can't do that with your audiences. And he got up there, and he's a phenomenal story, phenomenal. I get inspired just talking to this guy. He gets on stage and twice during an hour talk used profanity, and it had this huge repercussion. He goes, I can't believe it. I said, I know. You live in that environment. You have to make sure when you speak to your audience that you're speaking in a way that they can receive your message. And by and large, politics, religion, swearing, those are three no. Jim Key is a good friend of mine, 2002 world champion, or 2003 world champion, excuse me. He said it best. He goes, when in doubt, leave it out. And I thought that was really a great point. When in doubt, leave it out, because you alienate your audience. And I was talking about earlier, I had that joke. It was a joke. Climbed down out of the trees, wore a digital watch. I was alienating half my audience. Okay. So what you're doing is you're doing yourself a disservice, because you have a great message, you have great energy, you have great life force inside you, and conviction and passion for your message. And you have that, and then you're putting something in it that the audience is rejecting. So don't do yourself that disservice. Get that message duplicated by your audience. Okay.
Thank you, Anjali.
I think Tom was next there.
Tom Carlson.
Yeah. Tom, you're muted. Your mouth is moving.
Yes, you can unmute yourself.
There he goes.
I am one of your admirers, Lance.
Oh, you're the one. Okay.
Picture yourself at your age. I'm not going to ask you what it is, but you will still be speaking when you're 90 years old. And now I've revealed my age. I cannot speak anything but remotely. What are you going to change when your only option is to speak remotely online?
Well, I don't know, to be honest with you, Tom, because most of what I do now is remote. And actually, I loved for, what was it, 15 years pretty much. I was on the road 30 weeks a year practically speaking. I have so many wonderful experiences of speaking all over the world. Wasn't making a lot of money, but I was having a blast, and that was more important to me at the time. But when COVID hit, everything went online, but it actually worked out well for me, because like right now, if we were to do this session, I would need to fly to, Toronto or something, meet with Brahm. Everybody have to come in and have this session. And I'm able to get up this morning, get my exercise in, sit down, get a cup of coffee, do an hour and a half with you guys, and then I'm right on with my other work that I can actually sustain myself with. So I think it's a blessing in a lot of ways that we can communicate and share ideas without having to all get in the car and drive down to an auditorium someplace. So I'm not sure what I would change right now, but I'm sure when that time comes, I'll change it. But Tom, great to see you, and thank you for your admiration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
We have Edward Smith. So Edward, can you? Yes, thank you.
Yes, Lance, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, you talked a lot about the great opening and the structure of the speech and everything. How about the ending? What's the most effective way to get off the stage and leave them with your message?
Ed, that's a great question, because I've watched so many speakers get to the end of their speech, and I'm watching and I go, they don't know how to end their speech. And they stand up there and they talk and they talk. Just to tell you how important I think these things are, I think you need to have your opening down cold. I mean, you need to know word for word what you're going to say in your opening. And I think you need to know word for word what you're going to say in your conclusion of your speech. And just a quick story on that. I changed the conclusion, and I say it that way, to my world champion speech at the end of the third speaker. But I used to say, I changed the close to my speech, or I changed my close. And I was in Ireland, and the guy stood up and he goes, "Oh, did you hear that Lance changed his clothes in the middle of his speech? I'd like to see that one." So here's the thing. You need to have something that summarizes your speech. And I would say the conclusion, you take this whole huge thing you've been talking about and you put it in a little box with a bow on it that someone can take home with them. And I think you need to be able to summarize that in some concept that you can say, just remember this, the next time this happens, or when you're faced with this situation, this is what you have. I'm going to give you a little example of a speaker who's one of my favorite speakers. The best storyteller I've ever heard is a man named Garrison Keillor, who's on National Public Radio for years and had a show for 2 hours called The Prairie Home Companion. And he had these little 20-minute stories he'd talk about this mythical town called Lake Wobegon in Minnesota. And I went to see him here in Pasadena, and he spoke for an hour, and he told us, in that hour, he told us 7 different stories from Lake Wobegon. Maybe it's even 2 hours. And I'm up there mesmerized by how this guy tells the story and how the details and his timing and his voice. And he gets down, I'm going, he's got 5 minutes. He's got to conclude this. He's got 7 different, there's no way he can conclude it. There's no way, he can't say, thank you, there's 7 stories. And he gets down, he's got about 3 minutes left. And I go, how's he going to conclude the speech? He's got to wrap this up. And then Garrison Keillor, being the professional he is, he said, let's just remember that life is a gift, and every day is a gift. And let's treat every day in life as that gift. And what he had given us was 7 days in Lake Wobegon, 7 gifts from Lake Wobegon. And he summarized that in 3 minutes because he was able to encapsulate everything he would put into that speech. So without looking at your speech, I can't go, here's how you conclude it. All I need to do is you need to be able to take everything you said and you need to conclude that speech with some very short, concise concept that the people can take home with them and remember that, which will take them to the rest of your speech.
Lance, one of the things that I remember, those who are old enough to remember Seinfeld, he always said, always leave on a high note.
Yeah. Oh, no, you should always leave your audience in a better condition than you found them. That's why I say speaking to inspire is breathing life into your audience. There have been a lot of people I've heard that were speaking to expire. They expired their audience.
Thank you, Edward. Anything else, Edward? Thank you.
Okay.
Aswati, go ahead.
So who's next?
Yes. We
Okay.
have Jared. Can you
Jared, if
please
you could
switch
put
on
on your video.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're muted, Jared.
Yep.
There you go.
Lance, I'd like to really thank you for this. You've really, really preempted all my issues and dealt with them so professionally. So I want to really take this opportunity to really thank you.
I'll give you my Zelle number. You can shoot a check over to me, okay? So.
All right, I'll make sure. Now, what did you have to unlearn? If you can share 3 things that you unlearned in order to be a professional keynote speaker.
That's a good question. I don't know that it was unlearning, but I'll tell you a couple of things just in my speaking environment in general. One was I talked about, I had to speak about things that I believed in, so I had to find those things in my life. And there was a lot of stuff I was told. The other thing that was major in my life, and had I never won the World Championship of Public Speaking, handling this issue for me was worth all the competitions I did. And that was in 2004. I thought I'd won. We had the regionals back then, and I thought I'd won the regional competition. As a matter of fact, they announced speaker number 3, speaker number 2, and I was standing up at my table to go up and get my trophy to be the go on, because I was so sure I'd won the contest. And it was Jim Tucker from District 5. Jim and I had a long-standing relationship. And there I am halfway out of my chair, to which you sort of straighten your coat up and scratch your back and sit back down. I'm going, what? I didn't even place. And there's a bit of a story behind it, but I got home that night and I had a realization that it was going to be pretty hard to learn from my mistakes if I was unwilling to admit that I was making any. And that transformed my life tremendously, because I talk about this imprinting we have through my family and my school and stuff like that. It was sort of like I was never rewarded for making mistakes. Nobody ever said, well, that was sort of stupid. What'd you learn? They always said, we taught you better than that. You shouldn't do that, right? So I had this whole thing. If I made a mistake, I sort of tucked it behind me, and I had a pretty big trail of luggage. It looked like Eddie Murphy in Coming to America 1 with all the bags coming down. And I started unpacking my bags and finding silver linings of great messages inside all my regrets and all my failures and all the things I was least proud of in my life and my most embarrassing moments. And I did that inventory on my life and opened it up. And to this point, I had a motorcycle accident, and I go, oh, there's gonna be a great speech in here. What can I learn from this experience? And the other one is, I think, just having a genuine love for people, and the fact that you have an opportunity. This goes back to my first entree into Toastmasters. Roberta, I was in Toastmasters about 2 months, and they had the international speech competition, and they announced it, and I went up and I said, Roberta, what is that? And she said, that's like you had 5 to 7 minutes to speak to the world. And my first thought was, if I had that, I would say, pick somebody else who knows something to say something. You know, I'm not qualified to do that. But I realized that every day we have an opportunity to touch people and uplift them to do something to make their life better. You can either pick them up or you can put them down. There's no in the middle. You do it in the middle, you put them down, because if you don't do anything, you lessen. You can either pick them up a little bit or you can put them down. And I through discovering myself, just have a wonderful love for people. And I just want to see what I can do to contribute to that. That's where I sort of come from, my center. And whether it was, I don't know, it was unlearning so much as it was self-realization and becoming sort of finding my core center in my life. And I'll just wrap with this. I too am a Spartan. So they're doing horrible this year in football, but go green, go white. Okay.
Thank you. One of my greatest takeaway is the use of a quote and relating it to myself as a conduit to help the audience get to learn exactly what I learned. And that is my greatest takeaway. And thank you very much once again.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Jared. Awesome. Before we bring on, and just two more questions, and we'll wrap it up. Actually, if you don't mind, Lance, I don't know if you're running late, but if you can stay on for a little longer. Before we go into the next question, I will ask Hannah to post in the chat here the feedback form. We thrive on feedback, ladies and gentlemen. We are serving. It's a project, we are just serving from our hearts. And how you can serve me back is to give me feedback as to what you thought of this event, so that I can improve. I really love feedback. I thrive on feedback. My team here, there's several people here on the team, Hannah, Aswati, and me, who thrive on your feedback. So please fill in that feedback form. And I can vouch that Lance always leaves me inspired. He doesn't diminish anybody. He always leaves people inspired. So thank you, Lance. Jason Wilson, I think, is the next person. Aswati, Jason Wilson here. If you can put him on. Jason, put on your video. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're muted there, Jason, if you're trying to talk. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Great. My question is for you is that I know that you can't replace speaking experience, meaning that you can't rush it. Because you come off very authentic. Amazingly, even when you're just answering questions, you have the natural pausing, your timing. I mean, everything they talk about what you need as a speaker, you can do with just answering questions. And I know that comes from your extensive years of experience with speaking. So if you're not authentic in your ability to speak because of your lack of speaking experience, what things can you do to try to help facilitate that? Because again, I just listen to you answer questions and wow, he could do it in answering questions. You're like, you must be a master at table topics. It's unbelievable. But how do you facilitate that when you just don't have the amount of experience that you need to come off more authentically?
Well, I'm gonna leave you with I understand it a couple ways, but there's a Will Rogers quote, and as I was sharing the fact that it was going to be pretty hard to learn from my mistakes if I was unwilling to admit that I'd made any, that I pretty much live my life by now, which is good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of experience comes from bad judgment. And so the way you get experience is, the way you get good judgment is by having a lot of bad judgment and reflecting on it and gaining experience through that. And what you're looking at is someone who now has been speaking for what 30, almost 40 years, 35 years or something. I've done extensive communication training and emotional intelligence training. I've done, you're looking at a tremendous amount of experience. The way you do that is you basically get on the horse and ride it. But the other thing I would say is that, and I heard a great statement. I was at a Boy Scout breakfast, a big fundraising breakfast in LA last week, and they had 3 top women leaders, because women are now in Scouts and stuff. And they were talking about work-life balance. And this lady said, it's really not work-life balance, it's work-life integration. And I thought that was a great concept of integrating your work and your life together. And one of the things I would say is that it's not all speaking, it's also getting out of your comfort zone. And the point is, you don't get anywhere in life staying in your comfort zone because you're comfortable. So you're not going to make any progress. So you've got to do things that put yourself outside your comfort zone. And when you do that, you'll start to discover your life force, because that's what it takes to survive outside your comfort zone. So a whole other talk about this. But I've had people write to me and they go, I just don't have a speech topic. I don't know what to talk about. I say, go bungee jumping. Well, when I say go bungee jumping, you'll have something to talk about. You're telling me you're not living enough life. You're not getting outside your comfort zone to have anything to talk about. Go have the crap scared out of you and come back and talk about it, because you're so far outside your comfort zone. Go ride your bike for 100 miles and come back and talk about what it was like to do that, to accomplish that. And what I'm saying, Jason, is there's the speaking experience, but there's the living experience too. And when you start to push yourself outside that comfort zone, you push yourself out in the new territory, new emotional, new mental territory for yourself. You discover who you are and who you aren't when you do that. And that's one of the reasons I had such a penchant for climbing mountains and rafting rivers and scuba diving and sailing and rafting and, and hiking, all the things I did, because I was discovering things about myself, and I had a huge purpose to do that. So integrate all that in, and you'll speed up your path. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Absolutely great. Now, before we go on to the very last question, Aswati, no, Hannah, if you can just post the global Keynotes challenge link for people who haven't registered for that challenge, and they can use the material here from today's Lence's talk into that and how to craft a keynote speech, which means, Aswati, if you can also put it in Lance Miller's, I always say Lance Secretary, Lance Miller, I know.
It's real simple.
Lance Miller's website.
Yeah.
Lance Miller's website.
It's real simple. It's lancemillerspeaks.com. So
correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Last question is from Mohammed Azimuddin. I think he's from Leadership Speaker. He's from Mohammed Azimuddin. If you can put on your video and then.
Yeah, thank you, Lance, for such a wonderful presentation. I would like to recall some of your previous training that I attended. It was almost 10 years ago in Doha, Qatar. You came there and you presented. Yeah,
I had a wonderful time in Doha when I was there. Yes.
Yeah, I remember you picked a paper glass from dustbin and took a broken pencil, and then you started creating
You're breaking up a little bit, Mohammed, but
and,
yes.
Yeah. So it was really very great for that. But today I have a question. It has two parts. The first part is that for the let's say for the keynote speeches, can we take some inspiration from the speeches, the winning speeches of the world champion public speaking? Second part is that can you just share any of your successful and wonderful keynote speech that you connected with the audience, and how did you connect with the audience in your keynote speech?
Okay, I did not understand the first question. The second one was how did I connect with the audience, but I didn't get what speech it was. Bron, did you get that any better? Or?
No, I didn't. The sound is a bit muffled on this on my end as well. So I know Mohammed Azimuddin is at work today, so he's not using his
so let me
system.
I'm gonna address this on I'm gonna talk about my world champion speech and some things I did to connect. First of all, that speech was designed a specific way. I walked out. I knew I was going to be one of several speakers, and I knew they were going to have heard several speakers. So I needed to get the attention of the audience right up front. So my opening was a little hard with the ultimate question, that question that's plagued man since the dawn of time, and that question that each and every one of us must ask at some point in our life. And I was a little bit hard at that point because I wanted people to go, holy smokes, what's this question? This is huge. And then I pull the thing out and I go, do you validate? Well, that's stupid. And I mean, that's such a crazy question. I didn't want to create a confusion. And this is another thing I talk about. Don't create a confusion. I want to create a little mystery. I had a validation ticket and I just moved. How did I connect? I told them where I was. I was 26 years old, living in a small town. But here's one of the things I want to talk about. I used 3 examples and they were all true. I had a job I didn't like. And I assumed everybody in the audience at some point in their life had a job they didn't like. So I knew that they could relate to that. I hadn't had a date in 3 years. I assumed everybody in the audience had dated or, had not dated when they wanted to, but it was real to them on dating. And I had a couple of roommates named Mom and Dad. And so there was a point in their life where their parents sort of became more roommates than they did parents. And everybody had that transitional point, but they had a living situation, a dating situation, a working situation. I knew everybody in the audience would have had that and could relate to those things in my life. I could have talked about the fact that I was driving a milk truck that had a DT466 diesel engine in it with a 10-speed Road Ranger transmission and a two-speed rear end in it. Nobody in there has ever driven that, and they would go, "What's he talking about?" Work, dating, living situation. That's how I connected with the audience up front, that they could sort of see where I was. And I went ahead and repeated those through the whole speech, that those were the things I was trying to resolve, because I figured everybody had that in common. That's just that's a little snippet of what I did to help relate to get the audience to relate to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mohammed Azimuddin, thank you very much. Yeah, I think he's at work anyways today. So, and he works in a very remote area. He's a member of my club, so I know.
Excellent.
So thank you, Mohammed, and he's a part in the keynote challenge as well. Lance, thank you so much. Thank you especially for being such a good friend, for inspiring Toastmasters, being magnanimous. Last week when Craig Valentine pulled out, you were willing to come on, but of course the timing wasn't quite right. So no, right? The timing didn't quite work out by the time you replied. We had done some alternatives. But thank you so much, and I really appreciate your willingness. You've come so many times now on the show and in other things that I've done before as well. I really appreciate your help, your support, and who you are as a human being, really. That's what really matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Brahm.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, this session is ended. We will stop all the recordings and everything, but I'll hang on here for a little while longer if you just want to speak to me and so on. Let me